Welcome to Papa Tom's Take, episode 5, March 23. One of my two fans suggested that I should put the number and or date of the podcast so people can keep them straight, or persons can keep it, or person can keep it straight. The good news is there's in the P47 administration, there's only 3 years, 9 months, 28 days, 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 15, 14, 30, you get the idea, seconds. So we're making progress, but while the 2 months has just been a chaotic ride, but in some ways it's not really chaotic because Project 2025, which Trump as a candidate disavowed, is really, in a lot of ways, a roadmap that P47's administration is following. So it's not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise that there's so much coming down the road at the same time. And there's so many areas that are being probed, and if that doesn't work, they go somewhere else. And if there's a legal dispute over something, they poke somewhere else, and all of a sudden they bring up annexing Greenland and making Canada the 54th state. So it's meant to be chaotic. And one of the things that occurred to me, kind of as an aside, is that if you notice, P47 takes great pride in having his Sharpie and signing in a very showman type way, and then displaying his executive orders, and sometimes surrounded by people who supposedly have a stake in it. One of the examples is that he actually signed an order to disband the education unit with children all around him, as if it was going to help them. But back to my original point, I think the signing of these is kind of a presidential version of his signature comment on The Apprentice, "You're fired." So now it's, "I've signed these executive orders," which, as I said, leads to a chaotic time. So the title of this episode is Poker Hand, Low Hanging Fruit, and Other Stuff. The name I've given to my studio, which is nothing more than my den, is the Weave Plus. And so this is one episode that I'm going to use P47's discussion of his ramblings as a weave that leads someplace. I've named my studio Weave Plus because I'm hoping that, unlike his ramblings during the campaign, and since then too in news conferences, that I hope that at the end my ramblings have a plus, that they make some sense, unlike his. The first thing that I want to talk about is a poker hand. And I did a little research. I'm not a poker player, but in 5-card draw poker without any wild cards, if you, after the draw, have a hand of 2 kings, an 8, 4, and a 2, statistically, that's considered to be a 50-50 hand. And so the old Kenny Rogers thing of know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. Well, that hand is one that a poker player would have a hard time making the decision, because 50% of the time his one-on-one opponent is going to have a better hand, and 50% of the time it's going to be worse. So the decision has to be made by the poker player whether to hold or whether to fold. Well, the Democrats, and in some ways I have to give the Republicans credit for this, because whether they did it consciously or not, the Republicans, by passing that continuing resolution, basically dealt the Democrats in the Senate this 50-50 poker hand. And I know there's been a lot of criticism over the Democrats who voted to pass that. But let me put in perspective a little bit of what they were facing in this 50-50 scenario. If they voted for the continuing resolution, that meant the money went forward, the government stayed open, no one got the blame for closing the government. But the hitch on that was it was the funding from the Biden administration, which one could say, oh, that's a good thing. But apparently, when the budgets originally passed, those monies will have some earmarks or focus point or targets attached with them. And during a continuing resolution, the money goes forward, but those directives go away, which means that if you voted for the continuing resolution, you were having a level budget, but you were giving P47 the option of how to, within the context of each program or each department, that would be spent. So that's a lot of power given to P47 and his buddy Elon. Now, the other side of that poker hand is if you vote against the continuing resolution and the government closes, it's a he said, she said situation where the Republicans are clearly going to blame the Democrats for the closure, and the Democrats are clearly going to blame the Republicans. And so the rankle goes back and forth and back and forth. So the other side, the political part of closing down the government, is that if you do that, it's P47 and his buddy Elon who gets to decide what are the essential components and parts of the federal government that is considered essential and therefore remain open, either with paid employees or people that are basically not paid but have to be at work. So the thinking is that P47 would use that close down to help identify functions that could be removed without any much blowback from the people. So either choice, just like this poker hand, has quote benefits, although that's minimal, but each choice has pitfalls. And so while I'm not pretending to have the depth of understanding that would be needed for a senator to either vote for or against the continuing resolution, I think that the noise, mainly from the left, about the choices that those Democrats who voted for the continuing resolution, the noise that we're hearing about that, it's not as straightforward as it might look on the surface. Like I said, it was the hand that they were dealt was 2 kings, an 8, and a 4, and it's hard to decide whether that's a fold'em or a hold'em hand. Now there are some Democrats, and it appears that the leadership has taken a kind of wait and see and let the P47 fall on his face by his own chaos. And there's something to be said for that. However, it's easy for me sitting here in Ohio to make this following suggestion. But I think if I were managing the Democrats in the House and the Senate during P47's speech to Congress the other week, I side with Al Green. Al Green stood up and shouted and disrupted the speech and was taken out of the chambers. I think the strategy should have been that 2 or 3 congressmen and senators at some interval should have stood up and shouted something maybe generic like 3 equal branches of government, or Congress needs to do their job, or something that was kind of generic, and disrupt the speech and have the sergeant of arms have them removed from the hall. And I think that strategy should have continued until there was only 2 senators, 1 senator, 1 congressman or woman left. And I think they should have then stood up, turned their back to the president, and simply stood there quietly, silently through the rest of the speech. I think that symbolic action of resistance would have been important for, if nothing else, the people, the Democrats and people on the left who believe that at this point the party is kind of rudderless and not using the power and the voice that they do have in opposition to what's going on with this administration. Washington Post recently identified 6 Democrats, elected Democrats, who are in fact standing up and speaking out, and I suspect that number is going to increase over time. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Dallas, Texas. I think it's Dallas, it's Texas for sure. She's the real firebrand. She speaks up in committee meetings and so forth. She's been on different interview shows, and she speaks quite in quite an interesting way about the administration. She doesn't mince any words. Several prominent Republicans are holding counter town hall meetings in locations where the Republican senators or representatives are unwilling to do so because of the backlash that they've been getting. Of course, the Republicans simply say they're paid people to come and disrupt. I've been on one demonstration, and I'm still waiting for a check from George Soros for my activities. I'm sure that check is in the mail, just like the check from Mexico to pay for the wall is in the mail. What I want you to do is, well, what I'm doing, you can do it if you like, is to keep an eye on Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut. I first became aware of Senator Murphy because he is a vocal person who speaks out on the Senate floor regarding particular school shootings. I've seen several videos of speeches that he's delivered. And recently, Senator Murphy stood on the Senate floor to almost an empty chamber, which is bizarre to me, but it happens all the time. And you can find this on YouTube, and it's worth 30 minutes of your time to watch this, because Senator Murphy gave a speech that's entitled, 6 weeks in, this White House is on the way to being the most corrupt. You can find it on YouTube. Again, Senator Murphy, 6 weeks in, this White House is on the way to being the most corrupt. I think Senator Murphy is a person to keep an eye on. And he's a politician, so he's probably got his eye on the White House. And so the things that he's doing now, he believes are moving him further down the path for success during the primaries for the 2028 election. Notwithstanding, he's one of the people who makes a lot of sense. Bernie Sanders, I know he's, some people, when you bring up his name, think he's basically crazy. And Others are having town halls, and Sanders' message has to do with the movement of this country towards an oligarchy. And oligarchy is a term that was kind of vague in my head until I did some more reading about it. And perhaps it'll be the subject of a whole podcast later. But just when the Supreme Court in two cases basically opened the floodgates for money from rich individuals and PACs and corporation, the possibility of, quote, buying a politician, which has always been there, went way up. And when we look at the activities of Elon Musk in relation to the government and in relation to, and particularly when viewed from the angle of his contracts with the government, it just seems like in Russia, the oligarchs are behind the scene pulling the strings, but it looks like Musk and perhaps some of the other billionaires who were at the inauguration standing right behind P47 when he took the oath. Some of them probably behind the scenes are pulling strings, but Musk is right out there pulling the strings and wielding his chainsaw. Actually, I'm going to go. No, I'll stick with my title, low-hanging fruit. What I mean by this is that there are two examples where this administration is just going after low-hanging fruit. And by that, I mean that my two examples are that recently the Trump administration has failed to renew the rights of the people from various countries, Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, and other places with political strife and human rights issues. The Biden administration had given them temporary humanitarian parole. The term parole is simply one that's used in the immigration law. I'm not sure of the origin of that word, but it doesn't imply criminal activities in any way. The P47 has now in the process of not renewing those rights. Now, they're not citizens, but they're not undocumented. But there are a group of people who have conformed to the conditions of their immigration status. So it's a group that they know the addresses, they know where they live. They are easy, low-hanging fruit to pick up, to deport. That's not the promise from the campaign of criminals, murderers, rapists, and terrorists. It's just people who were legitimately here under temporary humanitarian status who have had that removed, and now they're being gathered up. And it's a large group. If you total up the from different countries, it amounts to close to 1 million people. So when you have an administration that's trying to eliminate undocumented immigrants, you can pick up this group who are not undocumented because it's low-hanging fruit, and you can add that to your numbers to deport. So you can publicly say that now I've deported more than 1 million people, but that 1 million people were the low-hanging fruit, not the criminals, not true undocumented. Again, under immigration law, they were documented. Their status expired, and P-47 used that as low-hanging fruit to add to their deportation numbers. They haven't been deported yet, but keep an eye on it. They will be. The other low-hanging fruit has to do with the Department of Government Efficiency's move to simply remove probation federal employees who are on probation. If you just think about that for a second, that's an easy group. They don't have the rights of the people who have gone through their probationary period. They don't have the protections. So that's low-hanging fruit. But if your job is to root out inefficiency and fraud in an organization, the people who have just come in the door are not going to be the ones who are in any way engaging in fraudulent activities. They haven't been there long enough to figure out that I can do this and I can do that and I can get sell my influence and become rich, or I can't even think of a specific example, but they're new in the door. They're not creating fraud. And if you think about it from your own work experience, if you hire a new person, in my experience, if you hire a new person into your office or your program or your factory or wherever, they're on probation for 90 days. They're going to be some of your hardest workers because they have to have a positive performance evaluation at the end of those 90 days, or they're out. So this is low-hanging fruit. This is not going after fraud in any way. And newer people coming in the door probably have newer, more updated skills. So in some ways, you're going backwards in terms of efficiency. I don't know what to say other than low-hanging fruit to make a show of this. These are the cuts that we're making, and new people, probationary people, cannot be part of the deep state. They're too new. They cannot be involved in probation. They're too in fraud because they're too new. So low-hanging fruit. Department of Government Efficiency simply saw that as a group that they could whack off easily, and they did, or they are doing. Okay, so now let's do some quick shots here. At the time that I'm recording this, the Department of Education is still a group, a department, although P-47 has issued orders to basically dissolve it, that the elimination of the department has to go through Congress. Although more and more, P-47 is ignoring the co-equal branches of government. So let's talk about a little bit of the Department of Education. The Department of Education, let me say this clearly, I've heard it on so many reports, I've read it so many places, and it's true. And, the MAGA maniacs aren't going to believe it, but it's true that the Department of Education does not get involved with curriculum and selection of textbooks. Those decisions are made at the state and local level. So this notion of returning education to states and local areas is just a bogus boogeyman to get people riled up. Now, the department does provide money, and there is a civil rights enforcement branch, so that branch will look at individual states and individual school districts, perhaps, and say, you are not in line with this civil rights legislation. You're not giving equal opportunity to people with disability, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't say you have to teach critical race theory or you have to question whether evolution is really a function, or that climate change is a reality. Doesn't do that. It simply makes sure that the rights of individuals are upheld. What the department does do, and I don't have a complete list here, but they offer Pell Grants, which is probably one of their biggest financial budget areas. Pell Grants are grants given to individuals on a need basis to go to post-secondary education. They give out Title I money to states, and the states decide how that money will trickle down to the individual school districts. Federal government doesn't do that. They offer money again to the states that trickles down to individuals, to individual school districts to provide support for individuals with disabilities. That was an act of Congress that the Department of Education administers. And one other program that's not a big deal financially is TRIO programs. I managed a TRIO program at Buffalo State College for, I can't remember now, 8 years. And in fact, I'm going to have a podcast on that later on. And originally that podcast was meant to be sort of a fun walk down memory lane. But now if TRIO is cut, it becomes more important. TRIO is a set of programs that help students from poor backgrounds below the poverty level and underrepresented groups to gain educational experiences that help them move on through the educational ladder. My TRIO program was a math science upward bound program where we took underrepresented individuals and first generation students, first generation college bound students. We brought them in for a summer program and we did science activities with them for the summer. 50 students. And again, I'm going to have a podcast on that, so I won't go into it. But that program changed students' lives. That program changed my life. Now, it's not clear what's going to happen when the department goes away. Some of these programs will shift to other locations. One of the programs I didn't mention is that when the bank crisis of a few years ago, the Department of Education took on and manages student loan debt, which is considerable. I think it's like over $1 trillion. The Department of Education managed that, and I'm not sure what that means. I don't pretend to know. But I've heard that P47 is moving that to the Small Business Administration. So the Small Business Administration is not known for acting as a bank or handling financial things. Some of this is going forward, it seems, without a real plan. If I were going to move the student loan management situation, I think I would have moved it to the Treasury Department or Internal Revenue, someplace that's used to dealing with financial kinds of things, not the Small Business Administration. Anyway, it looks like the P47 wants the department to go away, but many of the programs will be, it looks like the plan is, and I'm saying looks like because we don't know, much of the money will be put together into block grants, which will be given to the states, maybe without many strings. So who knows? Maybe programs for students with some kind of disability will shrink in a state or in a school district, and the Department of Education won't be there to raise questions about that. It looks like this is an example of kind of going forward without really a complete plan. The next quick hit I'm going to do is P47 mentioned, signed a proclamation declaring that there are two sexes. I've done a little, my background is in science, by the way. I've done a little bit of a dive into that. And the sex of an individual at birth, most of the time, can simply be determined as male or female without a question. But there are a number of individuals who present at birth as, the term's been used, intersexual, so that simply looking in the genital area, it's not clear. So my guess is that a doctor or a nurse simply makes a decision, flips a coin and says male or female. So clearly, simply from that level of observation, there should be three sexes. There should be male, female, and intersexual. But if you dive a little deeper and say, well, males have XY chromosomes and females have two X chromosomes, even that is not binary. And I'm not going to dive deep into this today, but males, as I said, typically are XY chromosomes, but there are a number of deviations from that. For example, some males are XXY, and that's called Klinefelter syndrome, that has a series of characteristics. And there's also some males who have XYY, which is called Jacobs syndrome. Typically, females are XX. There are some females that, when you look at the chromosomes, are XO. That's called Turner syndrome. And there are some females with three X's, triple X. And all of these have different characteristics. So that at the very biological level, the president's dead wrong. It's not simply two sexes, male and female. It's more complex than that. And I don't know why he felt the need to make that executive order anyway. It seems kind of crazy to me. Now, bleeding into this discussion is a discussion of gender. And again, I'm not going to go real deep into it today because I'm hoping that I can have a discussion of transgender be a separate podcast. But gender is a sociological term. It's not synonymous with sex, and it has to do with the role of an individual, the behavior of an individual, the identity of the individual. Sex is understood as fluid and a dynamic concept in sociology research. And so that the term gender and sex should not be used interchangeably. And I'm not going to go into that detail today, but I'm hoping in a future podcast that I can. Now, let me turn to another topic here real quick. The P47 has not ruled out the notion of a recession. In my view, if we do move into a recession, it's squarely on his actions. Real quick, technically, for government purposes, the National Bureau of Economic Research looks at the data and they declare when there's a recession. Commonly, recession is considered when you have two consecutive quarters with a falling gross national product. The Biden administration left a fairly strong economy, and most economists didn't see a recession on the horizon. If you hear someone say, well, it's Biden who did it, or P47, if a recession comes, blames the Biden administration, need to know a few numbers. The gross national product at the end of the Biden administration was over $29 trillion. And there was a growth rate of 3.9. So it wasn't falling. So it was, and that growth rate was a little higher than the Fed target, but it was growing. So it wasn't pointing to a recession in any way. A recession also deals with employment levels. And so at the end of the Biden administration, the November jobs report showed new jobs at 227,000, which was a growth, and an unemployment rate of 4.2. The Dow Jones on the day after the election was 42,221 and 88 cents. So it was, and it had been rising for a while. So all the no, not all the indicators. The obvious indicators pointed away from a recession and not towards a recession. So if P47's activities create a recession in the following months, it's on him, not Biden going out the door. Let me ramble on to one other quick topic. I've heard it said that the wealthy are not paying their fair share, and people have suggested a wealth tax. And I've come to be against a wealth tax, partly because it's much harder to determine whether a villa in Florida and a condo in Colorado, their value. And it seems to me that if you look at an individual's wealth, there are so many places where it would simply get tied up in appeals and so forth that it's not the efficient way to do it. But if you look at the tax bracket, the top tax bracket is 37%. And it basically says for a married couple filing jointly, that tax bracket begins at $731,201 and above. So there's a huge difference between 700,000 and a million. I mean, and 5 million or 10 million or 30 million or a billion. So that it seems to me that if you're looking to have wealthy pay their fair share, since we already in some ways agree that there are different brackets for different employment, for different income levels, then there needs to be several more brackets at the top end. There needs to be that 37% needs to have a ceiling of, say, 5 million, and then the next bracket is 5 million to 12 million, and you get the picture. That would be a way to, in my mind, have the rich pay their fair share. So I'm coming to the end of this weave. A couple quick hits. I think you noticed that the price of groceries has not come down. I haven't done a detailed tally of it. I do have some records that I'm going to compare it against, but grocery prices aren't coming down. Gas prices came down for a while, but now they're going back up. We're still waiting on the check from Mexico for the wall from the first P45's administration. And the last thing to talk about real quick is the Russian-Ukrainian war. I stand with Ukraine, as you might guess. The great deal maker, the art of the deal, seemed to going into this negotiation by first only negotiating with Russia, which then at a later time, Ukraine was kind of brought in, and that's another blow up in the White House. But it seems to me, and I've not been a great deal maker in my life, but it seems to me you go into the negotiation with positions that you're willing to move back from in order to come to an agreement. That seems to be fundamental to me. P-47's administration went into that negotiation with Russia saying to Ukraine, you're going to have to give up the land that Russia has taken, and you're going to have to not become a member of NATO. Those are two of the primary things that Putin was after with his invasion. So you're giving away the farm before you start talking about it. Anyway, I guess in the end, this weave all comes back to the notion of there's a lot going on. There's a lot to be afraid of. It seems like there's new stuff every day that it's hard to deal with. So I think my next podcast, by the way, I think finally I'm going to be able to get my guest on to talk about unions and specifically his expertises in the American Teacher Association. Anyway, that title doesn't sound right, but he's hopefully we can talk about unions. And I'd always like to end these podcasts with quotes. And I went looking for a quote that kind of captured frustration, but not giving up. And I found a bunch of them, and three of them were so good, I'm going to do three quotes today. The first quote comes from Margaret Thatcher, and she writes, "You may have to fight a battle more than once to win, so don't give up." And the next comes from Nelson Mandela, and it always seems impossible until it's done. Again, don't give up. The one that I really liked the most, and if I had picked one, I would have picked this one, was from Mary Ann Radmacher, and I hope I'm saying her last name correctly. I don't really know her. I looked up. She's a journalist and motivational speaker. She writes, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, 'I will try again tomorrow.'" So there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of things to keep track of. Do what you can. Donate to organizations that are being active in different ways, legal ways. Wear pins. I do. Put bumper stickers on your car. Go to demonstrations. Post on different social media. Just join the fight because it's going to be, what I say, 3 years, 9 months, 28 days, 2 hours, and I don't know how many minutes at this point. Till next time, it's Papa Tom's Take.